Hello guys, welcome to the video. Today, let's talk about where I come from. Let's talk about Puerto Rico. As I sip from a Puerto Rican cup that a friend of mine gave me with some Puerto Rican coffee, very expensive to get to Washington State, let's talk about Puerto Rico. So, many of you may know Puerto Rico for a lot of things, but not a lot of you actually know the island of Puerto Rico. Many of you do know Puerto Rico because of this bad boy right here. Oh, it switched on me. That's okay. That's Hurricane Maria. The hurricane that struck Puerto Rico in 2017 has been one of the most powerful storms to ever hit the tiny island of Puerto Rico. Let's show you part of the damage, shall we? This is part of that Hurricane Maria damage. And many of you have seen the images probably on CNN or Fox Media or Fox News or any other sort of media outlet out there, YouTube even. Many others of you know Puerto Rico for somebody very famous nowadays in the trap world and reggaeton world, Latin music. That is Bad Bunny. But do you actually guys know what Puerto Rico is actually going through? Do any of you have an idea how it is to live in one of the most famous and popular islands in the whole world? Well, today I'm going to explain to you exactly how it was living there, how conditions are in Puerto Rico, and most of all, my hope for the future of the island. Because as we all know, we want Puerto Rico to thrive and to grow, right? So let's talk about my experiences there. I lived in Puerto Rico for 24 years, almost my entire life. I was raised in Guanica, Puerto Rico, a town in the southwest of the island, very close to Ponce, the second biggest town or city in the island. Guanica is one of the most poor towns in the whole island, to the point that its GDP back then, when I was living there, it was the second most poor town in the whole island. So much so that when I took my wife, she was awestruck by how poor and how in bad condition that town was. It didn't help the fact that in 2020, during the pandemic craze, we had earthquakes constantly, every day, every second, every hour. So living in Juanica was really special to me. It molded my worldview of what's actually important and what actually isn't important in the island and in life. And to be completely honest with you guys, the way I see America today is very different from what Americans see America today. Um, and let's talk about it. So in the 90s, when I was growing up, I was a little kid. Puerto Rico was getting up there and at the top of Latin countries with the help of the US and the Constitution of Puerto Rico, which aligns with the Constitution of the United States to some point and allows us to have a commonwealth, or how we call it in Spanish, el Estado Libre Asociado, which translates to free associated state, which means is that we kinda have power over our own decisions, but we live in association with the country of the United States. To many Puerto Ricans, like famous artists, Calle 13 or Residente, how we want to call it, see this as a lame name for our real status, which is we're still a colony of the United States of America. Probably the oldest colony in the world right now, because every other colony has been disbanded. And this has affected the way we live our life. We expect the United States to either help us or own the fact that we are a part of the nation. And for those of you who didn't know, we are American citizens. We are the only Latin America country that has America citizenship from the time we are born. Mexicans don't have that. Venezuelans don't have that. Colombians don't have that. Any other Latin American country don't have the benefit that Puerto Ricans have by being an American citizen right off the bat when you're born. You can also claim Spanish citizenship because obviously we were a part of Spain for hundreds and hundreds of years. But mostly we are American citizens. Now, what does this entail? It entails that we can travel freely to the United States. Like myself, I traveled here in 2017, right before Maria hit the island, and I started living in Washington State with no concerns of being thrown back into the island because I wasn't a citizen. That's a benefit that many Puerto Ricans take for granted and others don't. Now, the reason this is important is because of this single fact. Many Puerto Ricans have left the island to make a life here in the United States. Many go to New York, North Carolina, and especially Florida and Texas because of the weather. To be completely honest, that has affected the economy of the island to an extent that now we are in bankruptcy. We have been in bankruptcy for years. And this situation has made the island very vulnerable to violence, drug violence, gangs, killings, you name it. When somebody here in the United States say, oh my God, there was a shooting in Seattle, and there's drugs everywhere, that's not news for me. I have seen all of that in my home country every single day. Every single day, there's more than 3 people dead, at least. The day that there's only 1 person dead or 0 is a miracle. That's how bad violence is in Puerto Rico. And we don't have huge cartels. We have micro cartels, which makes it the most worse because they're constantly fighting for terrain. Now, I want to show you the fact that we live in poverty is very, very true. And there's a graphic I downloaded here on Google, the almighty Google. And this is, hope you guys can see it. Puerto Rico has higher poverty and unemployment, lower labor force participation than the entire United States. And if you can see right here, it says poverty rate. Probably you can't see it, but there it is. It says that Puerto Rico, which is the yellow, has 45% of poverty rate compared to the US 15. So think about that for a second. Think about Black Lives Matter. Think about, Mexican unemployment and, deportation and all that. Think about all of that. We still in the United States have a 15% unemployment rate compared to where I come from, which is a 45. Does that mean that the suffering of the people here in the United States is not insistent, is not true? Well, no, of course not. Puerto Rico has suffered a lot more than any United States citizen in America can imagine. Think about this for 1 second. If the light goes out here, like we had a recent fire here in summer because of the heat wave that we had this summer. Now we're experiencing a cold wave. It's really bizarre. Because of the heat wave, we had a fire that turned down the lights for at least one day. We were all pissed and angry that that happened. And we were, in the heat trying to get cold. Imagine that on steroids. When Hurricane Maria happened, many Puerto Ricans didn't see light for weeks. No lights, no water, not even gas. Imagine that. Imagine being in Puerto Rico. All of a sudden, you have this hurricane and you don't have electricity for a whole week or two or three or a month. These are things that have been happening for years in the island. And the corruption of the government and the corruption of the politicians doesn't help at all. That's another thing that is bringing down our island. Back in 2020, in COVID time, I went to Puerto Rico to visit my family. I was engaged to my now wife, and I wanted her to see the island. When I went back to the island, it broke my heart. We were heading to the lighthouse in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico. That's a town at the west side of the island. And you could see people throwing their trash on the roadway because they couldn't afford to pay trash fees by the government. Think about that for 1 second. Here, you have a dumpster to fill up that you can fill up. You can pay for your dumpster. People come and pick it up for you. Imagine not being able to do that and go to a place like Seattle and you see urine, you see trash, you see all this sort of thing. This is what's happening in Puerto Rico in some places with steroids. Now, I have high hopes for Puerto Rico. Artists like Bad Bunny, Ozuna, Ricky Martin, Daddy Yankee, many have broken their poverty and have become famous and popular and have brought joy and love to the island. When Hurricane Maria hit, many of the first ones who were there to support the island were those guys. They were delivering water, food, and any sort of thing. Puerto Rico is in a very bad state. It hurts my heart to see where it has fallen. And when I live here in the United States, it makes me appreciate all the freedom and all the energy and power that we have here in the States. However, the United States, as appealing and powerful and beautiful as it is, it doesn't feel like home quite yet. And there's many reasons as to why. The culture here is completely different. The way of thinking is very entitled. I deserve this because I did this, or I deserve this because I live in this area, or I deserve this because I earn more than you. Puerto Rico, that doesn't exist. Another fact that I love about Puerto Rico that I hate about the States is the diversity Puerto Rico has. Puerto Rico is very diverse to the point that you don't care how a person looks. They can be Chinese, they can be black, they can be white, they can be brown, they can be Indian, for any country. And as long as they like our culture, and as long as they respect what we are as a country, as an island, as a colony, we accept them. That doesn't mean there's no prejudice, because obviously, like I said before, there's a lot of violence in the island. But Puerto Rico is so diverse to the fact that my aunt is brown, my mom is white. My grandmother was black, my grandfather was white. And there's that beautiful, beautiful orchestra of color and race and culture that just, it melts in your heart. For example, we have Puerto Rican music that is derived from hip hop. Why? Because that beat, that rhythm was passed down to us from our African American or African Puerto Rican ancestors. It's beautiful to see how wonderful and colorful Puerto Ricans are and how loving they can be. So, with that being said, Puerto Rico is what I want the United States in part to be in the sense of culture. America is what I want Puerto Rico to be in sense of economic growth and power and status. But for us Puerto Ricans living in the US, I want you to think about this for 1 second. I want you to sit down and put yourself in the position of our Mexican American friends, of our Peruvian friends, Argentinians, Guatemalans. And I want you to sit down and appreciate the fact that you have the right and the power to make a change, not only here in America, but also in the Puerto Rican main island. You have the power to use your voice, to use your strength, to change the way Puerto Rico is and the way the world perceives Puerto Ricans. Yes, we're loud. Yes, we're obnoxious. Yes, we're opinionated. Yes, sometimes we feel entitled that we are Americans. But think about those who aren't Americans and how much they will like to be and how much they work to be Americans. It's easy to forget that Mexicans have to cross illegally to become citizens because sometimes they have no other choice. Sometimes it's hard to imagine the pain that they have to go through when they see somebody die in the desert that they cared about. Us, we can jump on a plane and we can just go. But for them, what we have is precious. Let us use it. Let us use it to the benefit of our mainland and the United States. There's nothing wrong with building a culture here in Puerto Rico and in the United States that says, I'm Puerto Rican and I'm proud of it. I'm American and I'm proud of it. Let's make something of it. Now, Puerto Rican status, let's talk about that. I want the United States to finally take ownership of the island of Puerto Rico. To me, it matters what they do because it affects the lives of 3 million people or 2.5 million people living in the island. I want the United States to take responsibility for what they're doing with us. We appreciate all the help you sent. We appreciate all the help you have sent for years on out. But we want either to be a state of this beautiful nation, or we want to be our own nation. There's no two ways about it. Make the call and make a decision. The way that the Estado Libre Asociado is working right now, it doesn't work, and everybody knows it. Everybody in Puerto Rico that votes for the red party there in Puerto Rico understands that this is not working. Doesn't matter if they're blue or red, it hasn't worked. So it's time to change that. And I think Puerto Ricans need to wake up and understand that we need something new. We need to get rid of those politicians and kick their ass out of the legislative house and every other part of where they can participate in the government. It's time for us to stand up. We are from P-fucking-R. And I'm proud to say I'm Puerto Rican, but it saddens me to see the state of our island. It's time to make a change, guys. The time is now. Anyways, guys, thank you for seeing this video. I hope you don't get offended by what I said. The living conditions in Puerto Rico are very different to the living conditions here in the States. There's no comparison. Not Seattle, not Portland. Nowhere is compared to Puerto Rico, except other Latin American countries in the world or African countries in the world. Nothing compares to Puerto Rico besides those countries here in America. Probably New Mexico is the closest that you can get to understanding Puerto Rico and the poverty and the unemployment rate. So let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Make sure to like this video so that it can help the algorithm. Make sure to subscribe and to turn on notifications so that you get notified of when I drop a new video. And I'll see you in the next video. Pa'lante.